Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Mainframe Virtual Summit. And the topic for this session, protecting PII, data-centric security, and the mainframe. And to help us with this session, we have a trio of featured presenters. First, welcome Stuart McIrvine, VP Mainframe Security, Product Management at CA Technologies.
Thank you.
Matt Budzinski, he is with Wolf & Company. Matt, thanks for joining us. And Chad Rickensrud, Director, North America Operations for RSM Partners. Chad, thanks for joining us. Sorry about that. And a reminder, you can send in your questions and comments for our experts by using the Ask a Question section of your console. Also, you can live tweet the event using the hashtag MainframeSummit on your screen. And you can follow along the live Twitter stream on your console as well. Stuart, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to read a take you had from a recent blog post that you wrote. And you wrote, as mainframes are opened up to web and app-based endpoints and services, the risks of a mainframe data breach is something that every business should consider. Now let's start with the basic question. If the mainframe is considered the most secure platform in the IT infrastructure, if that's true, why is security such a big concern?
So before I directly answer that, let me kind of back up a little bit, right? So if we go back, 30, 40 years, right? If you think the mainframe sat deep inside the data center, there wasn't a tremendous amount of connectivity to the outside world, okay? Back in the old days of SNA protocols, along comes the internet protocols, mobile phones. The mainframe is still the workhorse for all these transactions. They still sit there, they operate there. We need connectivity to them, right? Whether it's from mobile phones or web applications or whatever else. So the mainframe is now much more connected than it ever was before. And that just introduces risk, right? We say the mainframe is the most secure platform. I hear you say that. Let's put it a different way. It is the most securable platform. There's a tremendous amount of very sophisticated security technologies that exist on the mainframe. But like everything else, right, it's only as secure as you configure it, right? So what is critical is leveraging a lot of that technology up there, understanding the vulnerabilities that you have. It's very critical to understand the vulnerabilities, the fact that you are connected and there are a lot of different holes in, but having those systems, configured in such a way that you are secure. Yeah, you can make it the most secure platform. You can also make it the most insecure platform with a lack of skills and not using these products properly, right?
Interesting.
Yep.
Chad, I want to bring you into the conversation. Think about the overall context. Where does the mainframe fit into the overall security strategy for an organization?
Thanks, Jim. I think current state is different from maybe what it should be. Currently, we see a lot of mainframes getting a pass in a lot of best practice enterprise security policies and procedures. So while they might have really good policies around testing and pen testing and security audits and baselines and all these sorts of things around all their other platforms, sometimes the mainframe isn't held to as high a standard. Sometimes that's because they don't have the expertise. Sometimes that's because it just works. So we just sort of kind of forget about it and be a little bit of a victim of its own success and its reliability. But the shorter answer is it needs to be treated like just another computer, just another platform. If you have best practices for your x86, your Windows, your Linux, your web applications, your network platform, then those policies need to be applied and tailored to the mainframe platform. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a potentially ugly failure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to bring Matt into the conversation. We see the mainframe security has been really focused on access and identity management. Have you seen a shift toward a more data-centric approach for security on the mainframe?
I think we definitely have, especially in the regulated environment. If you're out there in the financial sector, in the healthcare sector, the regulators are really pushing for that type of risk program, where it's more data-centric. And it's not a bad thing, because I would say if you're a medium to large size organization and you don't have that type of program, you're probably spending a lot of money on areas that you're not getting the benefit from security. And at the same tone, you're probably missing some pretty important areas. So the data-centric environment really helps, it helps the organization just make sure they're putting their money where they need to put it. And the other thing that I think it benefits, because I'll hear a lot of conversations from CISOs who are always complaining that their executive management is not listening to them. They're trying to implement these things, and it's because they're not bringing it into a business speak environment. So the executives are confused, and you can't just say the sky is falling. So I think this approach helps them understand too where they're spending their money. And so I do think if you're not there yet, you need to get there. Small organizations, maybe not so much, because you may spend more time doing that assessment than just getting the tools, but at least in medium to large size organizations.
I want to pick up on a point you meant about the business speak and ask Chad to chime in on that. Is that a challenge that you see too?
Absolutely. Like it or not, both the mainframe and the security worlds can be very exclusive in their vernacular, right? And so one thing you learn early on if you're going to take, especially security and then mainframe security to the point where you want the C-levels and potentially outside customers and clients to really understand what you're saying is, you have to make it relevant to them. And any language you use, any demonstrations, any risks, frankly, that you lay out have to be in terms of what's really relevant to them. I mean, it seems sort of 101, but we see all too often in the industry, both mainframe and security, where they have really polarizing language, and I think at their own peril, and not getting the agenda moved forward and what needs to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot at stake. Stuart, one of the things we find in our studies at IDG when we ask folks, what's your overall security strategy? And I'm going to be a little facetious. They say, what strategy? I mean, to have an overall, security strategy that you update and you test is, I'm not going to say it's a rarity, but we don't see it as often as maybe we should. What I'm hearing here is that the mainframe should just be part of that overall strategy. That in that regard, it really isn't different than other systems.
Absolutely right. And I mean, a lot of what I agree 100% with a lot of what Chad was talking about. Treating it as just another platform. That is critically important. And then I'm picking up on Matt's points around data-centric security, for example. One of the things we often see is as customers are taking a data-centric approach to security, they find that previously, right, not so much now, but previously there was a lack of tools to do sort of a lot of the data-centric security on the mainframe. They would offload data onto distributed platforms to go and look for some of this sensitive data, right? We're stressing that leverage some of the capabilities we deliver for doing this on the mainframe, because as soon as you do that, you're making a copy of sensitive data. You're treating the mainframe as an isolated platform, right? You're focusing much more. So again, I'm trying to kind of blend the thoughts from both Chad and Matt here. Treat it as just another platform. Leverage the many tools that are available, right, to do your specific tasks, security tasks on each platform under an overall enterprise-wide security strategy.
We heard in our last session how many of the trends that we would throw under the category of digital transformation, including agile DevOps, for example, are really valid for the mainframe, and they're really relevant. But Stuart, we hear a lot about DevSecOps now, and that seems to be an important trend. How are these trends influencing the mainframe security methods?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you said DevSecOps. I truly am, right? Because I say repeatedly, you cannot do DevOps properly without security, right? And security, it's not an afterthought after you put your infrastructure together. It has to be embedded every step of the way, okay? So there has to be a secure design of applications. The applications have to be source code scanned, right? They have to be penetration tested, critically important. As well as having strong operational security, to look at how the app's running, are any vulnerabilities now that it's running, you know, what's happening to the app, and feeding that information back, you know, as you do the next iteration of the app. So security has to be embedded, it has to be all the way through, and that's the most cost-effective way of doing it too. Going back to our other point about treating mainframe as just another platform, from a DevSecOps point of view, some of the development and security can be done on the mainframe, some of the development can be done on distributed to move the application to the mainframe. So it's very much a seamless platform from a DevSecOps perspective. The other area you mentioned was machine learning, yeah, and I think that's a very exciting area in general, but in particular, because I'm biased, it's very exciting for the mainframe too. Machine learning is pervasive across multiple different domains. I think I heard Ashok, and if people didn't get a chance to hear this comment, you know, go back and listen to the earlier panel session. But you know, Ashok was talking about the different domains that machine learning is applicable for. Is it storage? We're attempting to identify, are we going to run out of storage? What can we automate to fix that, right? In the areas of system performance, are we starting to, you know, lose CPU in certain areas? You know, how do we fix that? Security, of course, our area here, critically important. Again, a lot of the skills in the mainframe are retiring. We need the machine to be doing more for us to protect us. Okay, so that's absolutely critical. An example I can give you here is just leveraging the machine, leveraging analytics to understand baseline activity. You know, here are my typical users, here's what they typically access, here are the times of day that they typically access this, they don't do so much at the weekends, and baseline that activity. Then as you start to detect anomalies to that, flag that as an alert, right? You can even go as far as trying to automate some things. It could be force the user to re-log on again or something like that, right? But the machine learning, I'm very excited about, you know, more and more of this technology coming onto the platform, and I'm especially excited about coming into the whole security discipline.
Matt, when we talk about the evolution toward data-centric, does that tie into machine learning? Is that part of the?
Oh, you know, absolutely, because I think, you know, the only other fix other than a machine learning or behavior analytics in finding these threats or picking up on these vulnerabilities is our security awareness training programs. And as we all know, that we need to have them, the regulators say we need to have them, but at the end of the day, they're not sustainable. That's not going to keep us from the new wave of hackers because they're constantly getting around them. So we'll still always have some level of security awareness training, but to Stewart's point, unless we start implementing that machine learning and it just becomes part of the systems, we're just not going to keep these guys out, basically. And the other point about the DevSecOps and the DevOps that I think has always been a challenge is I always see DevSecOps over here and DevOps over here, right. And these are the folks that say no, and these are folks that are trying to get it out as fast as possible. So to your point, how do you get that ingrained? Because if you have these two divisions like this, you're never going to get a good agile with security built into it.
Exactly. Chad, you're nodding in violent agreement over there.
Yeah, I mean, all too often, you know, security is the group that says no in enterprise, you know, the way the enterprise works. And what Stewart was saying earlier, you bring security in and make it part of the development process, and now it's an enabler, and it really needs to be. That's the goal of security all along, is to get the right things to the right people. I mean, you can secure yourself out of business, right? It's about risk management at the end of the day. So starting earlier in that process really makes it easier than having to come back at the end and always be the bad guys that have to say no or, you know, go redo this along the way, right?
Yeah, at least go from saying no to let's think about this.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm going to shift gears here for a second. We heard in the last session from Jamie Thomas with IBM the Z14 announcement. A big part of that's getting a lot of attention, pervasive encryption. Chad, what are the implications for businesses of that?
Yeah, so I've been reading, as I'm sure anybody who is in the mainframe world and hasn't been living under a rock lately, all about pervasive encryption and the Z14. And first and foremost, it's fantastic. It's encryption of your data done right, right? So the ability to, if I'm a storage engineer, I need to be able to move files around and stuff like that, but I don't need to necessarily be able to read that data versus a developer or the end user or whatever. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I'm really impressed with how they've implemented it. From what I've seen thus far, is fantastic. And so, that being said, in the security and in IT world in general, sort of notorious for solving a major problem, and then maybe there's a couple of follow-on things that we haven't thought about. And so the thing I would say as sort of the asterisk to all this pervasive encryption stuff is really make sure you understand, one, what risk are you mitigating? So there are no panaceas, right? There are no security silver bullets. And a lot of people think the mainframe is this kind of, unicorn of security, right? That it has like this magical secure posture just by virtue of being. And anybody who's been in the industry for any length of time knows that just doesn't happen. You're with pervasive encryption, you're mitigating the risk of data exfiltration, of people being able to get your data out of there that can't see it. You're also making much smaller the targets of people that a hacker would have to go after to be able to get access to that data. So now it's not just anybody with system access that can read data sets. It's only these few apps or IDs that have read access. So that's really key. That's really important. But it isn't, if you're still using a very weak password set, very weak password algorithms, small key spaces in your passwords, then it doesn't really matter, because you've got all this 100 pounds of encryption on the back end, but it's still pretty trivial to guess somebody's password, that sort of thing. If you're not using two-factor authentication or long passphrases, then you're still making it quite easy, and you're going to put yourself at a lot of risk and do a lot of work. So what I would say is, yes, do it, but don't forget the basics before you get to that point. Use passphrases, use two-factor, do your security awareness training, all this kind of stuff, and know that you're fixing this area, but there's a lot of areas over here that pervasive encryption doesn't fix or doesn't mitigate against. And the last thing I'd say about it is, you also now shine a big light on key management. Make sure you really understand key management, because the nature of encryption is you're going in and intentionally scrambling your data. And the only way to get it back is via key management. IBM's done a great job in how they lay this out, but it's really important that you understand that before you dive headfirst into this, because otherwise, you put yourself at a great deal of risk, maybe if you haven't really thought that through. So do it, but understand what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Stuart, I'd love to hear your take on the pervasive encryption. From what Chad's saying, not a panacea, part of a security program, but what's your take?
So my take, again, I applaud IBM on what they've delivered here. I think it's a much needed set of capabilities in security. For me, what I see it doing is adding that additional level of granularity on access control. At the end of the day, we have identity and access management. We control access to what people want access to. But as Chad was talking about, now providing keys that limit access even more narrowly is very important. IBM's done it in a nice, seamless way. What I'd like to add, though, however, is implementation of this gives you a level of security. What is important is to be able to understand where is your sensitive data stored, right? Once you understand that, and there are capabilities, WCA delivered today that help you understand where this sensitive data is and who has access to that, right? Now, what that will allow you to do then is basically say, okay, I now know who has access to this, and there's a bunch of people on there that don't need access anymore. And because of the ease of which this pervasive encryption works, if I remove their typical access controls, right, that data becomes garbage to them. It's encrypted, everything else, right? So I think the ability to find and classify your data, understand who has access to it, and this C14 pervasive encryption, right, is a very nice combination for adding some very granular security around a whole data-centric security approach.
Yeah, the whole data question, I looked at a study this morning, and it was some scary percentage didn't understand how their data moves from mainframe out to where it's going to be, either put to use, and they just didn't understand that data in motion part. They couldn't really explain it, which brings me to compliance, Matt, because we can't really talk about security without talking about compliance. And I want to hear about the implications for regulatory compliance on the mainframe, and can we simplify it? And that does beg the question, because if I'm asking about simplifying, that means it's complex.
Yeah, no, and so the trouble with compliance, especially when organizations think about regulatory compliance, they say we need to be HIPAA compliant or we need to be PCI compliant, and then they start building a specific program for HIPAA compliance, and then they build a program for PCI compliance. When they actually should just have one framework that brings in the mainframe and follows the guidance of that framework. So NIST, ISACA, AICPA, they all have really good guidance. So if you're struggling with a data-centric approach or a risk assessment approach like that, you know, just go reach out to them. And then all of a sudden, if you have one framework you're following, then compliance should just come with that, right? You should, you know, there'll be a little few tweaks, but you shouldn't start with compliance. Start with good programs, and then that should get you to good compliance.
So you find that, Chad, in your shop?
Yeah, I mean, what we often see is exactly what Matt said. You know, people derive their programs to meet the compliance spec, but often the compliance spec was built to mitigate some problem, something that happened. They created compliance to prevent that from happening again. Instead of just having good overall security hygiene, and if you do that right, if you meet like a NIST standard or some other, higher level standard, you're probably going to be compliant just almost as a side effect of doing it right, which is a much better target to shoot for than this constant moving target of the next compliance regulation.
Yeah. Stewart, the CA take, the compliance, any thoughts on that you want to?
So, a big part of compliance is being able to prove that you're compliant, right? Okay.
Right.
I mean, that, everyone fears the audit. Everyone fears even more failing the audit, right? So the ability, and you may have, for example, extremely good systems. Do you have the ability to run the reports and prove that you're in compliance, right? Rather than have to take an auditor through a lot of manual steps to show that certain controls are in place. So I think one of the big areas is reporting around compliance, and that's a big area we tend to focus on. Yes, of course, we've got the underlying tools to help you be compliant, but having that reporting that sits on the top that really helps you, put a pad of paper down in front of an auditor that says, there's the proof, right? That's what's critically important.
Excellent. In the couple minutes we have left, I want to just kind of summarize, and I'll start with you, Chad. Thoughts about the importance of a data-centric strategy and how you can get started on that. Yeah.
So I think one of the themes you heard from everybody up here throughout this whole thing is you treat it just like another platform, and it might be, well, how do you do that? I would say if you're in the position of somebody who is in charge of securing the enterprise, and the mainframe is one of those platforms, I would reach out to the people that are in charge of mainframe and mainframe security and say, how do we know that we're not vulnerable to, WannaCry, whatever? I mean, there's things they might just laugh at you, say, well, we don't run that protocol or that. Okay, maybe not that specifically, but something like that. Ransomware, all the denials of service, all these other things that can happen. And I would say be skeptical. If they say to you, oh, we can't because of, and then they give you some feature or functionality on the mainframe, I'd be skeptical of that because, there isn't anything magic about it that can't be undone through a configuration error, human error, right? Misunderstanding of how something works. So be skeptical of that. On the flip side, if you work in the mainframe security world and you just haven't been heard or don't feel like maybe you're pounding on the door and they're not listening, it's like, we've got bigger fish to fry, the mainframe works just fine. The converse works really well. You say, hey, did you know that, this could happen? We could actually be subject to this, or we have all these different logs and all these different alerts, but nobody's really watching them. We're still using, password rules from the 80s, this kind of stuff. I mean, I think both of those can work pretty well together, but my, overall is you have to bring it into the enterprise fold just like any other computer.
Matt, key takeaways for listeners before we sign off?
I would say if you are that security person struggling, that with getting the resources you need or developing the relationships with those folks, step back and do a self-assessment. Think about how you're communicating with them, how you're working with them. don't be that no person. Be part of the team, and you will get farther with your recommendations. So, and that's the biggest struggle I see in the security world.
Great, thanks. And Stuart, you get the last word.
I do good, thank you. So just outline some key steps, I think. You know, as you're taking a data-centric approach, one, it's critical that you don't do that in isolation. You combine it with your identity-centric approach to security. You can't secure what you can't find. So, you know, there are steps. You've got to be able to find that data, classify it, because you need to understand, you know, what classification to have, how risky to have it, and then protect it, combining what we have with the Z14 pervasive encryption. And I think we're there.
Yeah, this was a great session. Thanks, Stuart McIrvine, Matt Petvinsky, and Chad Rickensrud. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
And to the audience, stay with us. After the break, we're back with our next session, one of our favorite topics, 5 ways DevOps practices boost speed and innovation on the mainframe.